This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken start today's show with a part of their Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast. They discuss how prescribed burns can impact water sources. Continuing the show is Jill Zimmerman, president of the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, as she shares her experiences in agriculture and what makes the industry unique for Ag Day. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk ends the show, recognizing the dedication of McCarty Family Farms, now in its 5th generation, as they have been named the Kansas Distinguished Dairy Award winner. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode from K-State's Drew Ricketts and Joe Gerken as they discuss the impacts of fire on water resources.
One of the big reasons that we see so much prescribed fire, in tallgrass prairie, but also other prairie landscapes and even woodland ecosystems, is because that fire removes the vegetation that's above ground and sort of stimulates regrowth of that vegetation. It also releases nutrients for those plants. So how can those things contribute to what's going on in a pond?
Yeah, getting rid of the above ground material is definitely something that happens. I think a lot of us have a notion that when a fire comes through, it kills everything, right?
Yeah.
And really it just kind of resets, gets rid of all the material from that had already grown up and probably isn't going to grow back, right?
Yeah.
And so we're getting rid of the stuff that's above ground. We're not necessarily getting rid of the root structure, like you said. And that's an important distinction because those roots really help us to hold the sediment together and control erosion, and control kind of, what the structure of the watershed looks like. So lots of changes going on there. Getting rid of those, and you mentioned nutrients, getting rid of those nutrients can be a good thing, but not all the nutrients go away. So some of the phosphates, the nitrates, mercury, some of the heavy metals can settle down in that ash, and those can wash into waterways. So you can see some effects from those types of things. But the really big change that you see is how water is flowing over the surface of the landscape after a burn. So you don't have all that vegetation to kind of slow down the water as it's moving. That ash layer can make like a sheet, almost a tarp, where the water can't penetrate into the soil. So that means that if you get a big rainfall event right after a fire, that can really change how the water is moving throughout the landscape. And then that obviously affects what happens in the stream or the pond where you're managing that watershed flow.
Soil type also probably has an effect on this too, right? And so when we're thinking about the timing of the fire, if you've got really sandy soils, you want to be burning at a time of the year when you're going to fairly quickly have some regrowth in there so that sand doesn't blow. And I would guess that same concept applies to water and erosion due to water. So how do you think that affects it too?
Yeah, I mean, the soil type is immensely important, right? And that's regardless of whether the fire is there or not. We tend to kind of overlook that a lot, but that's going to affect how the water is moving. It's going to affect nutrient cycling, how much of the nutrients can be taken up. Things like how many heavy metals are there in the system. Mercury is something that's common, that's talked about a lot, especially with fish. And that can accumulate. That accumulates a lot in invertebrates. But you can see trophic cascades where that comes up through the system over a period of years. So, but that all a lot of that goes back to that soil type to start with, right? Yeah. And so it's not just the water that's being moved. The soil type's really important for what's being carried into the ponds or the watershed or the ecosystems as well, right? So the soil type, like I said, something that often gets overlooked, but can be really, really important for the water quality when we get to the ponds or the streams.
Sure. So the effects of ash
Yeah.
or the nutrients associated with that ash on the aquatic ecosystem. So what's important for us to know there?
Ash is probably the overland flow of water can be really important. And so if you get a really big rainfall, like I said, right after you burn, that's really important. But the more common concern would be the ash that you would see entering your aquatic ecosystem. And so in small amounts of ash, the pond or the stream can manage that. It's when if we had a really intense forest fire, for example, that can cause a lot of water quality issues. It can cause, if you get enough, it can block sunlight, which can kill phytoplankton. So there's not food for small organisms. When you see that happen, you can get a lot of death and oxygen levels can plummet. That takes a fairly large amount of ash generally for that to occur. But it can happen. When you get that much ash, it can settle down to the bottom of the pond. It's heavy, and it can cover up a lot of the habitat that's really important for fish spawning. Generally, those are relatively short-lived. There might be a year or two, maybe even 3, where you kind of see some effects. But most of the fish populations are resilient enough to kind of recover from those. So definitely implications of ash, and ash can also introduce, some of those ugly contaminants. So you can see over time, you can see issues with that occur. But again, relatively small concern. Most of the time, the aquatic ecosystems are buffered enough, and the fires that we have in the Great Plains, at least, these ecosystems, are made to kind of thrive with these types of disturbance events. So it's something that, you should be aware of, but you shouldn't be scared of it for the most part.
What about, every once in a while somebody will ask a question and I try to funnel them to you now, but what if we have cleared a pasture, we've piled all the brush into a ravine or other part of the watershed that might funnel all that ash down into a pond after we burn that brush pile, maybe a year or two after that clearing has happened?
Yeah, that situation is something you'd want to avoid if you can, right? And so if you can avoid big brush piles upstream of your pond or your watershed, you definitely should do that, right? When you have intense amounts of burning take place like that, you're burning a big brush pile, there's all of that's going to burn down. You're not going to get rid of everything, though, right? And so you can have high amounts of phosphates and nitrates wash into your pond. High amounts of ash can wash into your pond, right? The flashiness or how quickly water gets into your pond can change. And so all of those things can impact the water itself. They can impact the water quality. So documented cases of algal blooms going up in situations like that. The research is really strong that almost always happens. You see large spikes. Now, if you allow vegetation to grow up and can hold that back, and a lot of that is it's fairly easy to do because you're trying to hold back that ash, as much as you can. So it's not just the water getting through. I mean, it's going to bring some of the phosphates and nitrates, but the ash material, the unburned material, the really high amounts of phosphates and nitrates come from that stuff. So allowing some vegetation to hold some of that back can be really beneficial. But if you're burning brush piles upstream, the likelihood of that causing a problem is much higher than the other situations we've talked about. Large amounts of ash can get into your system. They can affect things like the water quality we talked about with the nutrients, but also turbidity. So how easily you can see through that water, right? That can change, and that can have cascading effects throughout the food web. So large amounts of ash like that'd be similar to that, talked about a really intense forest fire dumping large amounts of ash. Those are the situations where, the chance of you seeing negative results, fish kills, your entire pond turning over, much more likely in those situations when you're introducing large amounts of ash or runoff right after a brush pile burn.
So thinking about, we mostly been talking about potential negative ramifications of fire in terrestrial systems on those aquatic systems. What are the benefits of fire in terrestrial systems on those aquatic systems?
Yeah, that was a lot of systems.
It was.
I think, the biggest benefit is going to be seen not necessarily at the pond itself, but throughout the watershed, right? And so having a diverse plant community is going to hold back a lot of the nutrients, hold back a lot of the sediment, going to be better for wildlife in general. In most cases, it's going to prevent things like eastern red cedars from encroaching and turning these grasslands into forested landscapes. And some forested riparian habitats are great. I think like 80% of the forest in Kansas is riparian forestry.
Sure.
And so there's benefits to that, but what we don't want is the Great Plains to be replaced by these woody species, and especially species like the eastern red cedar, right, that don't have much ecological benefit. And so when you think about fire done well and done as part of a strategic management plan, can really improve the watershed and help with things like reducing nutrient input into the pond, increasing water quantity, and increasing water quality, increasing water clarity. So lots of benefits there. You tend to have a lot more diversity, a lot more wildlife that's visiting these aquatic habitats when the watershed is managed properly. So I think that, a lot of the benefits of fire benefits aquatic systems for sure, but a lot of those benefits are throughout the watershed and not necessarily on the water itself.
Once again, that was K-State's Joe Gerken and Drew Ricketts with part of a Fins, Fur, and Feathers podcast episode. If you'd like to hear the full episode, you can do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by searching for Fins, Fur, and Feathers on your favorite podcast platform. As always, you can find more information from K-State Extension's wildlife team by going to their website, wildlife.k-state.edu. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show recognizing National Ag Day, which is today, March 24th. And then to talk about it, we're joined by President of the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, Jill Zimmerman. Jill, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good morning, Shelby. It's always good to have a conversation with you.
Jill, as the president of the CARL program, obviously very involved with it, but did your involvement in agriculture start when you were pretty young?
Oh, yeah. I grew up on a family farm in South Central Kansas, and it's just been a part of who I am since the very beginning.
So as you look at agriculture, how many different walks of life do you really see agriculture playing a role in?
Oh, agriculture plays a role in every walk of life, right? And I think that's the cool thing about the CARL program is it brings a lot of different people from different sectors that agriculture touches. And it really makes for interesting conversations and just the different places that it takes us and how it impacts each and everything that we do.
Has there ever been a sector that you're surprised to see agriculture in?
No, because we have to eat, fuel, all the things that we do, right? So no, I don't think so. Mm-mm.
Is there something special you feel when you think about agriculture, especially in Kansas?
I think agriculture in Kansas is just, those are two words that go together and just go together really well. Like agriculture is just a part of who we are. It's a part of our state. We're just uniquely positioned in the Midwest. And so being in the heart of the Midwest, and it's a perfect place for agriculture, right? In terms of the growing seasons and the soil conditions that we have, it just makes for a great environment. Now the weather sometimes can throw us some curveballs, and I think we could use a little moisture right now, but I just think we're really neatly positioned in a unique part of the world to be able to feed, fuel, and clothe the world. And it's just a profession that brings a lot of pride and a sense of like being a part of something that's bigger, that's making the world go round.
And as you interact with a lot of people who do help take care of agriculture, is it a special connection you see between different individuals?
Oh, yeah. I very much so. I think when we think about agriculture, and I think there's just certain traits of those of us that are involved in agriculture. There's a passion, and it's hard to describe that passion that just runs so deep, is so deeply embedded in each of us. And then that passion drives a work ethic, and it drives a sense of community. And when you describe community, Carl's a community, the town of Towanda is a community, your family's a community. And so it just brings this interconnectedness amongst all of us to want to make the places we call home better.
And Joe, what's some of your passion that drives being involved in agriculture, even from a young age?
I don't know where it all started, Shelby, but my family was just, I spent a lot of hours. I was a young girl growing up on a farm, and I was that little tomboy that just loved that opportunity to be a part of that. I was always with my dad, and, just a traditional farm in Sumner County, but it was just very much a part of who I was. And, I just, I just knew that from those early beginnings, that's what I wanted to continue to do, was to be involved in agriculture because of the people, I think.
And have you seen people be able to come into, per se, the agriculture industry and be a part of that group?
Absolutely. And I think you think about through the Carl program and the impact that the Carl program has had. And like a lot of times there's people that are curious that come to the program to want to learn more, right? Because their work is impacted by agriculture, their work, and they want to have a greater understanding of the work that we do. I remember a quote from a gentleman that was from Topeka, and he's like, the Carl program gave me exactly what I needed, right? And so it provided that foundation, that understanding, so that he was better able to have more robust and be able to articulate a message within his constituent base that he wasn't able to have before.
And as with the Carl program, you do some traveling. And so as we look at just Kansas, what has it been like to go see the different avenues of agriculture in Kansas?
Our state is so different, right? So the Carl program travels from Garden City and Liberal to Pittsburgh to Goodland and to Northeast Kansas, and just the impact and the differences from rainfall, soil types, and the sense of community, and how it's just agriculture is just very different across our state.
As we look beyond just our state, what has been some agriculture you've seen, Jill?
That's cool. So I love to travel and I love to see the world. And so that's a cool component of the Carl program, is that there is always an international component with each and every class. And so through that travel, class members, each class is able to gain a perspective of traveling internationally, learning lessons about trade, culture, preferences, eating preferences, and nutrition. And then they're able to bring those thoughts and that what they see and learn internationally, and they're able to bring that back home. And it also is a very perspective gaining, right? In terms of being able to gain a different perspective of how others see and view us around the world. And so I think that is super cool too. And it just learning how the world is, and just cultures, and how deep seated those cultures are. And it just allows us to see our own work better, I think.
Is there anything, as you have traveled the world, that you've seen consistent when we think about agriculture?
Oh, the passion, right? So if you're talking to people that are involved in agriculture, whether it's in Cuba, United Arab Emirates, Brazil, right, all Australia, if you're involved in agriculture, there's just this passion and of wanting to do things better, wanting to be able to provide, and there's a love for telling our story, right? Like when we travel internationally, people just love to greet us. They love to tell their stories, and it's just so fun to see that.
And Jill, as we're thinking about stories, what have been some cool interactions you've had internationally when we're thinking about agriculture, or maybe just cool internationally?
Oh gosh, Shelby, that's super hard, right? But I think I really enjoyed 2 years ago when we were in Brazil. They were harvesting soybeans, so it would have been February of 24. They were harvesting soybeans, and had the opportunity to ride in a combine in Brazil. And they were also the same day that we were harvesting soybeans, they were also double cropping corn right behind. So it was like happening all at one time. And so also like interesting to see the growing perspectives and how aggressive they are in terms of their growing seasons and things like that. So that'd be one. That's a hard one, Shelby, to describe.
As I was looking up stories related to the Carl program and some of the travels, there was a story about milking camels. And when and where did that happen?
Yeah, so when we were in the United Arab Emirates, we went to a camel dairy. And so that was really neat, right? Like it's totally different than the dairies that we see here in the United States. And if you think about a camel, they don't eat a lot, right? Because of the nature of the how they're designed, right? But and then they import in the United Arab Emirates, they import all of their alfalfa hay. And so, but it's how they create a high quality protein, if you think for that, how large that economy is growing, right? And so it's just amazing. When we flew into Dubai, JBS Five Rivers was flying out of Dubai that time, a couple years ago. That might have been 4 years ago. But so, they're really concerned with a high quality protein product. And so that's where the innovation and the expertise of what we see in America, where we can often help provide those high quality protein sources.
As we look forward thinking about agriculture and rural America, what makes you excited?
Oh, I think I'm excited every day. I get really excited being involved with people that are younger than me, and just the energy and the enthusiasm and just the curiosity that they have. I think innovation, I think how that's going to continue, and AI, how that's going to continue to impact our work and help agriculture gain efficiencies in terms of, we're super efficient now, but if we think about how much more efficient we can be in producing feed and fuel and fiber that takes care of the world, I think it'll be interesting to see how that comes.
As we've mentioned, Carl, a couple of times, if people are wanting to find out more about this program, how can they do that?
So www.carlprogram.com. And actually, I'll put it one little plug in. Applications closed for the next class on April 1, and applications are only open January 1 to April 1 of even years. So applications won't open again until January 1 of 2028.
Jill, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was President of the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, Jill Zimmerman. As she mentioned, you can find out more information about this program by going to carlprogram.com. That is KARLPROGRAM.com. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll be joined by K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk for this week's Milk Lines. We're now cutting to that short break.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's Milk Lines. McCarty Family Farms has been named the Kansas Distinguished Dairy Award winner by K-State Extension and Kansas Dairy. K-State Dairy Specialist Mike Brouk says that the family, now in its fifth generation, was recognized for its dedication to sustainable dairy production, animal welfare, and community involvement.
Today I'd like to celebrate with our Kansas dairy industry as well as our consumers the naming of our 2026 Dairy Farm of the Year here at Kansas State University. McCarty Family Farms were awarded the 2026 Kansas Distinguished Dairy Award a couple of weeks ago at our annual meeting for the Kansas Dairy Association and Kansas Dairy Commission. The McCarty family came to us from Pennsylvania. They had been dairy farmers there for quite a while before they came to Kansas, and Tom and Judy came to Kansas looking for a way to involve their four sons, Mike, Clay, David, and Ken, in the dairy industry. Over the years, the dairy farm expanded, and as it was established at Rexford, Kansas in 2000. In 2009, Tom and Judy were honored as the Kansas Distinguished Dairy Award for their work with the family in establishing a dairy here in Kansas, as well as providing an opportunity for their sons. As we look at the operation since 2009, there's been tremendous changes in that operation. It's become one of the most progressive, technology-driven dairy farms in the world. As we look at what the boys have accomplished, they established a evaporation plant in 2012 and began a direct relationship with the Danone of North America as they condensed milk and separated cream at the Rexford facility. That also introduced a business model that allowed them to focus on long-term sustainability rather than looking at the fluctuations in markets as they adapted a cost-plus business model with Danone. In 2018, expansion continued, this time in another state as they moved to Ohio and partnered with a farm family there in establishing MVP. And then in 2023, they established a new dairy farm just north of the original location in Rexford as they named it the North Operation. That particular facility now houses 10,000 registered dairy cows and milks those in 220-stall rotary milking parlors. The family has placed a high degree of concern on sustainability and also regenerative agriculture in addition to the operation of multiple sites. These sites provide new thoughts as to how we might expand irrigation, use water-neutral milking processing, renewable energy, including methane production, and many other things that allow these operations to operate efficiently and serve as outreach to farms around as to what we can do to conserve our resources and improve our efficiencies. In light of that, in 2024, they did establish the Judy McCarty Learning Center at the Rexford location. That's a permanent education space for young people as well as a way they can showcase the many different types of projects that they're involved with in terms of research and regenerative agriculture. So just want to say hats off to the McCarty Family Farms for receiving the 2026 Kansas Distinguished Dairy Award, and congratulations to Mike, Clay, David, and Ken for the many changes that they have brought to the operation since 2009. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. Additionally, Apple Shamrock Dairy Farms, LLC, managed by Josh and Haley Waddell, was named the 2026 Innovative Dairy Farmer of the Year by Dairy Herd Management Magazine and the International Dairy Foods Association. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.